And it's my absolute pleasure to be joined here on India Today by Chris Hadfield, former commander of the International Space Station and author of the Apollo murders. Just to give you a brief sense of all that Chris has achieved, he's flown in 3 missions, built 2 space stations, performed 2 spacewalks, and was the first Canadian to have walked in space. So you'd understand why I'm particularly excited about his new book, The Defector, that is, in fact, releasing on October 10th. That's coming out. Chris, good morning. Congratulations on your new book, and thank you very much for joining us here on India Today. I've been seeing, from your social media interactions that you've been tracking the Chandrayaan 3 moon mission very, very closely. Just so for our viewers to understand from an expert perspective, from your perspective, how hard really is a soft landing on the moon?
Well, thank you and good evening. I heard someone say 1 billion cheers for Vikram, and add my voice as one of those billion cheers. It's immensely exciting, but as you say, it's extremely hard. It's 400,000 kilometers away, and we're landing way down to the south, 70 degrees south. It's as if you were landing on the edge of Antarctica, and you're trying to do it where the final last few meters or few feet of touchdown, you're just counting on the automatic systems. And so there can always be, a boulder in the way or an uneven spot on the ground, even though they've chosen a plateau. And I know that the Russians had no success earlier this week. Remember, they've launched 27 missions to the moon, and they only landed 7 times, and the last one was a failure. So it's still exquisitely difficult. But with the tremendous experience gained in Chandrayaan 1, which helped discover water on the moon, in Chandrayaan 2, which has been mapping the moon ever since, and now with sort of the granddaughter of all of those, of Chandrayaan 3, I'm really optimistic and excited about the landing that's going to be happening just slightly under 24 hours from now.
I loved how you referred to Chandrayaan 3 as the granddaughter of these missions. It's so aptly put. I'm going to borrow that phrase also in the next 24 hours. You referred to Lunar 25, and the reason I talk about it right now, Chris, is look, Russia has attempted this, as you said, 27 times. They've got it right 7 times. Now, in the last 50 years or so, we've seen several such soft landings occur. It's 2023, and yet we haven't really been able to master it. Why is that? What makes it so unpredictable or so hard so many years on?
Well, part of it is the nature of the moon itself. If you were going around the moon, the amount of gravity that you feel in different parts of the orbit changes. The moon is a lot more lumpy than the Earth is. It's got big, dense sections. And so that makes orbital prediction more difficult. It's hard to know exactly where you are. There's no GPS. So where exactly around the moon are you? How do you even figure that out? And even though we've taken lots of images from the orbiting vehicles of the plateau that Chandrayaan 3 and Vikram are going to land on, you still don't know the fine details. Imagine if you were trying to land a helicopter somewhere in India and you looked and looked and looked, but then just when you got close to the surface, you had to sort of close your eyes and then just descend the last 50 meters with your eyes closed. It's sort of that level of difficulty. And that's why the engineers at Isro have been working so hard since Chandrayaan 2 to improve all of the systems, to make the landing gear wider and more robust, to try and give extra layers of backup. And it is possible to land on the moon. 3 other nations have done it. And I think India is really poised right now to be the 4th nation in history to land on the moon. The scientific impact of that and the inspirational impact of that for young Indians right across the country. But it all comes down to that last descent and touchdown coming up within a day now.
Very true. And, the point that you also made about how hopefully this will come through, we've all got our fingers crossed. But also, besides what this will mean for ISRO and the kind of experiments and the moon mission that they want to complete, Chris. What does this mean really in the global space race that's underway? Where do you think it'll put India in that race?
I work with several Indian companies. I help run an international technological incubator called the Creative Destruction Lab. And right now I'm working with several Indian space companies. One of them is called Dhruva Space. And I think this type of mission of showing kind of the ultimate capability of what Indian science and technology and combined capability can do, it's extremely inspiring, not just to young Indians across the country, but to young business owners and young inventors, people who are looking to do something that used to be impossible. You need to have an inspirational vision of what might be possible to then drive yourself to make the most of your own capability. And when I work with the Indian companies and see the educational capability, the insight, the brilliance of the minds, and the opportunity that's opening up now, it's really showing just how Isro and space exploration in India is coming of age. And if you can land on the moon, I mean, you can do anything. And to me, that is the real essence of what is being attempted tomorrow.
You spoke about how this is so inspirational for every Indian youth watching right now what ISRO is accomplishing. There are a lot of cynics out there who question, Chris, what's the need for a developing nation to invest so heavily in space, to invest so heavily in space exploration? What's your answer or response to that?
Well, I think it's a really important question to ask because everything has to be done in balance. But I challenge anybody who asks that question, how much money does India spend on health and welfare and infrastructure to take care of the billion Indian people? How much money is spent on that versus how much is spent on research and development and exploration? And I know for Canada, we spend an enormous amount of money on taking care of the Canadian people, but we also spend a little bit of money on inspiring and exploring and pushing the edges of technology. And I think it's important to do both. You don't want to get way out of balance, but I think it's important to truly get the exact numbers of how much is spent on taking care of the people, but also how much is spent on pushing the very edges of what we know and understand. And when I was a little boy, it was because of the moon landings that I decided what I was going to do with my life. It's why I got multiple university degrees. It's why I challenged myself to become an astronaut and to eventually command a spaceship. And I'm Canadian. I'm not from a country that used to have a space program. And so, yes, you need to take care of the people, but you also need to give your young people something that is so inspirational that they make different decisions with their lives to make the absolute most of themselves. And that balance is important, but I think what we're doing right now is a really key part of India's future.
That's a very, very interesting perspective. Chris, and I'm going to say when rather, not if, Chandrayaan 3 is a success, when that soft landing is completed, does it essentially set the stage then for a manned mission? As someone, who's gone repeatedly to outer space, does a soft landing then mean that, we're ready for that next step of a manned mission?
When the very first human being stepped onto the moon, when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, he described it as one small step, obviously, but a giant leap for all of humanity itself. But you have to make those small steps. You have to incrementally improve the technology and all of the people that build those machines. You have to allow yourself to make mistakes on the way to eventual success. And with Chandrayaan 1 and then Chandrayaan 2, we've made those small steps collectively as a group of people, and push the technology a little bit too far, leading now hopefully to success for Chandrayaan 3. But there's a lot of numbers left after 3, 4 and 5 and 6, and it's only limited by the imagination and the collective will of the Indian people where this will take them. There are Indians right now selected as astronauts who are training to fly into space. You can't encapsulate science and technology and inspiration more clearly than in trying to develop the capability for Indian citizens to be able to look up and see a fellow country person flying across the night sky. And that's coming fairly soon. And with what we learned from Chandrayaan 3, it will lead to eventually not just an Indian citizen flying in space, but traveling all the way to the moon and walking on the surface. There's a Canadian going to orbit the moon late next year. That seems impossible to me. And yet, because of the small steps, that's happening for my country. And because of these steps of missions like Chandrayaan 3, it's happening for India.
Steps that you've taken has ensured this moment for your country largely. So I'm hoping that there'll be many Chris Hadfields for India also very soon. Chris, I will tell you this, that, with all of this talk of Chandrayaan, of what Isro has accomplished, it's piqued a lot of interest among Indians about space. And you've been there so many times, a former commander of the International Space Station. This is a tough ask. But can you tell me one experience that truly stands out for you? When you think about your journey in space, when you think about your experience in space, what's that one moment that always comes to mind?
Akshita, I was so lucky to spend about half a year in space. I went over India thousands and thousands of times, but I think my best moment when I was outside on my first spacewalk. We were south of Australia, sort of north of, in between Australia and Antarctica. And while I was outside on a spacewalk in the darkness, we went through the world's aurora, through the southern lights of the world. And I could see the reds and the greens, and they were pouring past our ship and flowing around me, the incredible, beautiful majesty of our planet. And it's very scientific. It's the Earth's magnetic field and the energy from the sun, but it glows in this beautiful ribbon of color. And this little kid got to go outside and experience that personally. This little dreamer from Canada, I got to surf on the world's aurora. And of all the things I've done in my life, of all the myriad experiences, to be able to personally experience that as part of our first steps away from the world, it was profoundly moving and beautiful to see our world that way and to recognize where we are headed collectively. It's a memory that is seared into my brain, and one that I hope more and more people get to experience as our technology gets better and better.
You've described that so beautifully. I half wish that instead of a journalist, I chose to be an astronaut after this conversation. But thank you very much, Chris, for taking the time out and joining us here in India today. This was a beautiful conversation and so inspiring for all of us here.